All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Welcome to this month's networking event for the BPCC Center for Teaching and Learning. Hi, my name is Megan Pollock and I am based out of Dallas, Texas. And I've been working with Allison Martin and Kirk Fontenot for the last year or so, helping to develop content for the network. So I'm glad that you've chosen to be here with us. Today, our topic is navigating change during the Great Resignation. And so I use the words of Bob Dylan to inspire us and to get us thinking about this conversation today. I played, a few minutes of that, thinking about the times they are a-changin. So come gather around, people, wherever you roam. So thanks for coming to gather around today for this conversation. And so we're going to have like all of our networking events, there's just going to be a little bit of information, a lot of conversation, and time for us to get to know one another and talk about some strategies to help us. So our agenda today is we'll do introductions here. We'll talk about the Great Resignation, what it is, and what are some of the numbers that we're seeing. And then we'll talk about change. We've got a small enough group today that let's just go around the room and have everyone share out loud. You can certainly use the Slido poll if you prefer, but let's just give everyone a chance to contribute. So Kirk, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Kirk Fontenot. I'm the Assistant Dean of Liberal Arts. I also teach English. And I chose to be here because lots of things are changing. And there are times when it feels like I don't know where to work anymore. BPCC looks so different. And I just want to talk about it. All the people leaving and people moving around, it just seemed like a good time to talk about it.
Thanks, Kirk. Alex Ekstrom, you want to say hi?
You want to try talking to mine?
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we're getting some feedback. So if you two are in the same room, you might want to, one of you turn your mic off. Perfect. Okay, so Alex, I think we're not hearing you, but we heard you some for a minute. Okay, so Alex is going to type her responses. Allison, why don't you say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Martin. I direct professional development and BPCC's Open Campus. Those are my two main duties. I am here because we are going through a time of change in our college like many of us have never seen before. So any way that we can talk about it and make sense of it, I think is a good thing.
Thanks, Allison. Jennifer, you want to say hi?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm Jennifer Lawton. I teach English here at BPCC, and I'm here today just to be part of the conversation and to talk about the changes.
Welcome, Jennifer. Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I am an English teacher. And like everybody said, I mean, I've been here for a while, and the BPCC that I started at right out of college looks nothing like where I am now. And so I don't recognize a lot of stuff that's going on. The students have changed so much. And so now the staff is changing as well, and just kind of how to navigate that and stay positive and stay moving forward during all of this sort of uncertainty is kind of what I'm looking for.
Great. I'm glad you're here, Laura. And V. Dennis.
Hi, I'm Vicki, and I'm the Dean of Liberal Arts, and I chose to be here for a couple of reasons. One, that I'm reading so much about the Great Resignation, and I think it's kind of an interesting situation. Some stuff that's happened because of COVID, and I think it's all something we're going to have to come to terms with. And I think it's going to change not just BPCC, which it obviously has based on everybody's comments, but I think it's going to change the state. I think it's going to change the country. So it's just something I kind of feel like Jennifer said, I just want to be part of a conversation about it. So.
Excellent. And I want to acknowledge Alex. She wrote, or they wrote in the comments. They're an English instructor, and just like Kirk mentioned, there's so much change happening around BPCC, especially recently, that's helpful to talk about it. Well, I'm so glad that you all have come to talk about it. So as you know, if I see some new faces and names here, so I'm so glad to have you. And the purpose of this time is, so I've got a few things to share with you, but really it is meant to be a conversation. It's not full workshop style. I've got a couple of articles to share and some statistics. So I'm so grateful that you're here and looking forward to talking about this with you. So I do think that hopefully, I'm always worried you're not seeing the right screen, but I do think you're seeing the BLS chart, right? Okay. So I wanted to look up and see some of these figures because, you know, we've been hearing about this over time, and this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what you see here, and I'll drop the link to this page where I found this in the chat if you wanted to kind of zoom in and look at it a little closer. But essentially what we want to look at to understand who's quitting their jobs are the blue section, because the red, these are layoffs and discharges. But what you can see here is you can see around 2020, the beginning of 2020, there was a clearly huge spike in layoffs and discharges. People were let go as the pandemic began to ravage. And then we saw a subsequent very, a significant decrease in the number of people quitting. That's the blue. But then since early pandemic, we've seen a much higher increase in the number of people who are leaving their jobs. And so you can see that the rate of the increase over this last couple of years is much higher than the rate of change over the last decade, right? And so that's what they're calling this Great Resignation. And so the latest figures that came out in January, it looks like about 4.5 million people voluntarily left their positions in November. And so this is an all-time high according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so from a percentage standpoint, the data says that it's about 3% of the non-farm workforce, which also has evidently had some headlines for people leaving that as well. And so I think that this is interesting for us to think about to see over the last decade, how many people leave their jobs. But, when we think about the fact that 10 years ago, less than 2.5 million people voluntarily left their job, and now we're at about, upwards of 4.5 million people leaving, that is definitely a huge increase, right? And so when we try to understand why and who is leaving, there's one study that was done by, and I found this in a Harvard Business Review article. And so this group of researchers, they wanted to understand what and who has been driving this recent shift. And so they did an analysis of more than 9 million employee records of more than 4,000 companies. And it included a data set from employees from a wide variety of industries. And some of the key things that they found is, number one, the two key things they found is that one, the resignation rates are highest among mid-career employees. And their data suggested that employees between 30 and 45 years old have had the highest increase in resignation rates, with an average increase of more than 20% between 2020 and 2021. And the second thing that they found is that resignations are highest in the tech and healthcare industries. And so again, they found that even though the resignations actually decreased slightly in industries such as manufacturing and finance, 3.6% more healthcare employees quit their jobs than in previous year. And in tech, resignations increased by 4.5%. I was really particularly curious to dig a little deeper. I'll drop the link in the chat to this article where I found this information. I suspect that, and I couldn't find enough data to support it, that a lot of people are leaving education, right? Which brings us here to our conversation. And I couldn't find any solid data to give me something to present to you on that. But again, we see that people are leaving, right? Now, to some other data that I found is that in this Jobless 2020 market trend report, they found that 3 out of 4 full-time employees are planning to quit their job this year. Think about that. 3 out of 4 full-time employees. This creates a big question mark, right? So even though you may have had a handful of colleagues who have already left, who's sitting around you that's planning on leaving, right? And what are they thinking about? Another data point they offered is that nearly 80% of employed job seekers believe that they can make more money by switching jobs than by staying put, staying where they are. Now, this last fact it seems conflicting to the last study I showed you, because it said that, so many of the people leaving were between 30 and 45, which is my age bracket. But the Washington Post reported that Goldman Sachs estimated last fall that more than half of those who had left the workforce during the COVID era Great Resignation were over 55. And so again, I think that either way we slice it, people are leaving, right? Here's another link to a Forbes article where I gathered that data. Now, the takeaway here is that the pandemic was the catalyst for the Great Resignation phenomena, but the economists are predicting that it's here to stay. And so my first question for us to think about is, why do you think people are either leaving or considering leaving BPCC? So I want to keep this conversation within our sort of sphere of control and influence. And so think about, and you're welcome to certainly turn on your mic and share too. But if you'd rather contribute through the Slido poll, if to use the QR code, you just open up your camera app and then hover it over the QR code, and then it'll pop up a little thing, open in your browser. And it's the same QR code that we'll use throughout. It'll just refresh. So either contribute on the poll or unmute and tell us, why do you think people are leaving? Or why do you think people are considering leaving?
I think that COVID changed people's priorities. Some people that I know that have left or are leaving, BPCC in particular, have kids, and they just realized, I want to be there for my kids, or I want to change the way my children go to school or whatever, because all my friends that had children also became teachers, not only at BPCC, but teachers to their children. So, there's a lot of people like that I know that have school-age kids that just said, you know what, it's changed. And for me, I don't have children, but there are days when I miss being able to be at home and teach every day. And so I think for some people that got to do that for a year plus, they went back to the classroom and thought, that wasn't me. I love the classroom, but there are probably some people that said, you know what, I'd rather be at home in my pajamas or whatever. And so that, I think, was a factor as well.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I added a couple of the things that you said to the chat. So someone else added changing professions from teaching to higher paid positions. This is true of my younger brother. My younger brother's been a high school teacher for a decade or so, and he has 3 kids, and he worked in Southeast Texas, and in public school, you don't really get raises. So he left so he could go make more money working at a plant. And it comes with a little bit more respect and a lot less drama, he says. So I also see added on the screen policy changes. So talk to me about policy changes, because Alex also added into the chat policy changes. So what's going on at BPCC around policy?
Well, I'm gonna be brave and just say it. I think that people, and this is just my like experience, but I think there are people at the college in the administration part that are making decisions and they've never taught in a classroom before. And that really kind of bothers me personally, but it also changes the way they make decisions. And I understand that from a certain perspective because it's a business, right? I mean, but at the same time, there's decisions that were made post COVID that you just kind of go, okay, that doesn't make sense. For a classroom teacher, you're kind of left wondering what that means for you, kind of at the end of the day.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Laura. And that's a really good point of like, we have people who probably are really well-intentioned, trying to move fast. But what happens is that, you know, we leave people behind. We don't involve the voices of those people for whom we are trying to lead. And again, I want to believe it's well-intentioned, but the impact of that is that we are leaving people behind in those changes. Thanks, Laura. So another comment here says, I think that the changes at BPCC are already ending our comfort anyway. So people who might not have thought about switching careers suddenly are. People are shaken out of complacency. Tell me a little bit more about that.
That was my comment. And I was just thinking, you know, we get comfortable in our jobs. You know, we might spend 10, 12, 15 years teaching, and it never occurred to us to leave because we're just comfortable. It's our job. Well, then when things radically change at our jobs, suddenly we're not comfortable anymore. So then the thought comes up like, oh, well, if I'm uncomfortable anyway, if I don't have that sense of security anyway, why not see what else is out there? I think that kind of prompts a lot of people to look and see what else is out there who might not have really even thought about it 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Shaken out of complacency. I like that. Thanks, Kirk. So I want to shift the conversation to think about how does this affect BPCC culture? How does it affect the culture and climate for you, right? So if you have colleagues who are leaving, or if you have colleagues who were talking about leaving, how does that affect you? Even if you are or are not one of those people who are shaken out of complacency and thinking about leaving, like, you know, there's, I forget the term, but there's a specific term. It's almost like survivor's guilt, right? It's really more related to people who get hit in layoffs, those who are left. So those who are left experience like this whole like psychological effect of like knowing that, you know, so many of their colleagues were let go. I imagine that there has to be something, you know, almost similar or comparable of like when we see our colleagues leaving, when they are shaken out of that complacency and taking leaps in their career, how does that affect us for those of us who are left behind? So someone added that there's certainly a loss, a vacuum, right? A loss of expertise. So many people who know everything are now gone. Yeah, so that can create a vacuum in institutional knowledge. It can create a vacuum in any number of kinds of services and how we work together, how we serve students. What else? Feeling rudderless. Tell me more. So somebody added, it changes our team dynamic. If only it would stop telemarketer calls. The go-to people are gone. Alex, I put your comment up on the slide as well. It's a sadder work environment when you have your close work friends leave. It can become somewhat lonely and isolating.
I think that there are also levels of responsibility that are being added to positions, which, like Kirk had made the comment that we were comfortable, many of us were comfortable in what we're doing. I mean, there's a certain routine and a certain level of expectation that we have. And then when there is this huge shift, then, the work has to go to somebody. And so there's increased demand on, not just on staff, but also on faculty, it's the whole organization that's feeling this increased, hurry up and get this stuff done. And it takes away a little bit. I think you said an important word earlier about career. And it takes away a little bit from what we consider our careers. For the faculty who are here, they consider their primary goal at BPCC is to teach and to work with students and to be part of student success. And then there are other things now that are being added that are not something they probably envisioned when they were in college getting this degree so that they could teach. I just think it's an added level of responsibility when the dominoes shift so dramatically.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of the dominoes, right? When one falls, it creates an effect on everyone. Everyone feels it. Somebody's got to pick up the slack. It changes those dynamics. Somebody's got to do the work, because hiring, at least in my experience working with higher ed, hiring's never fast to fill those gaps. Maybe BPCC's different, but somebody share, so thank you so much for sharing that, Vicki. Somebody else share a little bit about kind of how you're feeling about, culture and climate. It's certainly your team dynamics, but the climate is how you experience the space. And, we've been talking about over the last few months, if not a year, with our efforts with BPCC of just sort of the challenges of sort of reacting to policy changes, the challenges of feeling rudderless, feeling sometimes helpless to change. Kirk, in your work with the Faculty Senate, what are some of the things that you're hearing from the faculty about how people are experiencing this heavy time?
I think,
without giving anyone away.
well, I really hate this. It's almost like a us versus them with the faculty and the administration right now. And a lot of that comes from, not always hearing an acknowledgement of the changes that are happening. It's just kind of silence, and people are going to feel a vacuum. So there's speculation and rumor and distrust, and none of that makes for a good work environment. And so people gather in offices and share, like, well, I heard this and I heard this, and did you hear so and so's leaving? Oh my God, they've been here forever, and why would they leave? And without that communication or any kind of I don't know, acknowledgement, and it feels depressing.
Yeah. So what you're really tapping into is I should have put a slide up here to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, we're really tapping into what people are experiencing with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of like some really foundational things here, So the very bottom of the hierarchy of needs is safety security and safety, right? When the ground feels like it's shifting underneath us, that shakes our security and our safety, right? And we need those feelings. They're part of how we are wired to function as humans. And then the next layer, the middle layer is like feelings of belongingness and feeling valued. And when we aren't feeling heard, when we aren't feeling like our team dynamic is in a positive sort of trajectory, we have reduced feelings of belongingness and feeling valued. And so what the result is then we have to shift towards, then the sort of self-actualization is at the top of that. So that's what's leading people to leave, right? So they're saying, I don't feel safe. I don't feel like I belong. I don't have these feelings. So I'm going to self-actualize somewhere else, right? Like I'm going to go find those needs somewhere else. And so that then creates a domino effect of stress that everyone is experiencing. So I want us to think about, oh, go ahead, please. Jennifer, were you going to add something?
No, I'm just trying to switch to my phone. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So as we shift towards looking at some solutions here, I want us to really remember, and think about what are the areas where we can control and what are the areas that we can influence. There are lots of things that we have concern about, right? Like I'm deeply concerned about what's happening in Ukraine right now, but I have no control and I have no influence over it, right? So there's some things that we have to put over here and say, I can't drive change for that. But I want us to then look at that intersection of where does my will, my passion, my interest, my motivation, where does that intersect with what I can control and with what I can influence? And, Stephen Covey gets the credit a lot for these first three concentric circles, but it's really like ancient Greek stoicism. But it's recognizing what can we control and what can we change. And so as we begin to look at some strategies, I want us to think about what can we control, what can we influence, and really sort of relinquish those things in which we cannot. And I also want to add, so this is one of the quotes from my TED Talk, that when we think about leadership and management, and that's really so much deeply tied to conversations around the Great Resignation, leadership is too often synonymous with management. And if we want to create equitable and inclusive environments where people feel valued, where they feel like they belong, we cannot just leave this to those people who are in charge, right? It can't be an us versus them. It can't be an administration versus faculty. It has to be all of us taking accountability and responsibility for the cultures and climates around us. Each and every one of us can absolutely facilitate and enable belongingness for people around us. So my next question to you before we go into some strategies is, what efforts or changes do you think might help people stay? So let's brainstorm this a little bit, and then we'll look at some strategies from the research. Alex says money.
I also think that we have to go back to the idea of mindset. So much is, well, this is happening and there's nothing you can do about it. But for me, it's about being proactive. Okay, we see that enrollment's down. What can we do to improve enrollment? Let's be proactive. Let's think, let's do some things, instead of just, we're going to lose people. I mean, we teach a lot about slippery slope in English. And so I think that that's what happened. That's what happened. And that is what is happening. Well, so-and-so left. Well, that means so-and-so is going to leave now. And if that person leaves, then we're going to lose people in this department. And then we're going to have this issue happen. And then we're going to have this problem. And that's never going to get fixed. And everything becomes this big, huge, gigantic pit of negativity that it's hard to dig everybody out. So I think you have to think, okay, like you said, there's no way I can control what the state of Louisiana wants me to do. How can I make it better for us? How can we take that and make lemonade? And that is, I think, something that we are really struggling with right now. is
Yeah.
trying to figure out ways to make things better.
Thanks, Vicki. Great points.
This might be a little Pollyanna, but this is what I'm doing right now. Like, first of all, I think our division's really lucky because we do have that camaraderie still, but it's hard. Like, it's been a tough go, you know. I don't think we have people in our division that are, you know, negative or whatever. So that's been really helpful for me. But also, I just focus on my students. I unlock the door to my classroom, I close the door, and for that hour and whatever, they're my students. I'm teaching them, and that's all I worry about. It's when I leave my classroom that I just go, oh, here we go. But that 2 hours of my day where I get to teach in a classroom, not online, that's a whole different discussion. But when I'm actually in a classroom and I can see their face and have dialogue with them, it makes all the other stuff worth it for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Laura. Lost my slide. Here it is. So someone else added to the poll, hearing leadership say that they want us to stay. And so this made me, I pulled up a slide from a different deck that has Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, because it directly relates to that. Hearing people say they want us to stay, how would you map this to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Where does this fit? Having leadership tell you, we want you to stay.
I would put that under esteem, recognition, respect.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly, I think there's a connection between both of the psychological needs, so esteem and love and belonging, because it's somebody saying, hey, we respect you and we want you, right? Like that's saying you belong here so much that if you leave, you leave a gap for us, right? And so people need that sense of psychological, safety of like, I'm wanted here, I'm needed here. But how often do, we see people just say, I'm going, and people say, okay, right? Someone else added here, if people could reframe the local changes to see them as opportunities for them to step into new roles. So that's an asset focus for sure. So in chaos comes opportunity. There are the times when leadership qualities allow people to be identified as potentials for moving up. Yeah, so this is a great perspective and mindset, right? So like, just because people are leaving, maybe it's not always a bad thing, right? Like it can create new opportunities, and it can also create space for new ideas. Great points. Okay, let's see. I lost the notes here. Okay, so then the next thing I want to introduce us to, if my computer doesn't freeze. So there were 6 strategies that I read in this article, an Harvard Business Review article that I wanted us to talk about. And now, again, all of us, have some ability to connect with some of these, right? Depending on what our position is, we may have more control or influence over some of these things. But the first strategy that they mentioned in this article is to incentivize loyalty. I remember when I was a young pup, just fresh into the workforce, I was incredibly loyal to the company that paid for all my school, and I had that loyalty. But my dad, who was also in a similar industry, was like always one to remind me. He's like, it's okay for you to be loyal, but remember, they're not loyal to you. And that was advice that my dad, like grown up voice trying to give me, right? And so it's one thing for us to incentivize loyalty to our employees, but it's also important for us to help them realize that we want to be loyal also as a team, as an organization, right? So that there's not that culture and climate where like someone like my dad has that perspective of like, yeah, of course they want you to be loyal, but they'll cut you in a second, right? Like that's not the kind of culture and climate that makes incentivizing loyalty truly meaningful, right? So the second one is to provide opportunities to grow. And so somebody already mentioned this on that last screen with the last question of like, making sure that there are opportunities for people to advance, right? You know, and figuring out ways to help people advance. And advance doesn't necessarily mean move up in a rank. It means how do we help people build new skill sets that they want? How do we help them feel challenged? How do we provide opportunities for them to expand and to stretch so that they can get those needs met? The third strategy is to elevate the purpose of an organization. Or elevate the purpose of your team. We've got a couple of dean and assistant deans here in the conversation today, thinking about how could you, both of you as leaders, elevate the purpose to your employees? Kirk or Vicky, you want to add some thoughts? How do you elevate purpose to help your team members see the value of what they're doing?
I don't know, Kirk. I mean, I think it's hard because, it's like Laura said, you're kind of king of your own mountain or queen of your own mountain when you're in the classroom, and there's, you're completely fulfilling your purpose at that point, and then you come back. And there are different things. So I think that it's hard, but I also think that if you look at the elevate your purpose, in addition to provide opportunities to grow, we cannot stay the course. We just can't. If we, and Dr. Bateman has a really good thing that he says about we have to move the puck, move the needle is something we use a lot. But I think if we are not continually encouraging people to study a little more, read a little more, talk a little more, then we are absolutely staying the course. Mm-hmm. And we will not grow. There will be no skate to the puck. There it is. Thank you, Allison. So I really feel like that number 2 and number 3 are very closely tied together.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of things that we do in the division. There are a lot of things that you hear about, a lot of ideas. And we try to, I think, at least in liberal arts, we try to get people to have, a little courage to do different things. And we have a lot of people who will jump up and meet those expectations and grow. I just don't know how right now, when there is so much change, and Alex had a really good word in chat that I really like, that is a concern of, I think, I don't know anybody that's not a concern of, and that's stability. How do you elevate purpose when it feels a little like quicksand?
Yeah, so that connects back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if our basic needs, and now again, I'm extrapolating this a little bit to work, because basic needs are generally outside of work, right? But if this literal psychological safety, physiological and safety of our job feels unstable, then all of these other things are going to be out of whack, right? And so again, in some ways, we may not have control over the stability, but we have to think about what is it that what we can do to help, stabilize the best that we can. So the next couple of these actually really help that. So number 4, the strategy is to prioritize culture and connection. I think particularly as people, have been removed and moved to virtual, the culture and connection just feels like it just was like a wash, right? Just got kind of lost and was not prioritized, but helping people to have that sense of connection with and friendships at work is so important. And some of you mentioned that in the polls. Another is invest in taking care of your employees and their families. People are people and they have lives and they have all of these things going on, and we have to accept that, and we need to help them through those things, right? There's very little that we do that is so critical that can't wait till tomorrow, right? When we are holding people accountable to things that don't give them space to manage their lives and to manage their own trauma and things that they're experiencing, they are going to find some other place that's going to help them and honor them, right? So we need to create space for people to take care of themselves and to certainly take care of their families. And then the last one, and this is something that, Laura brought up, is that if some people really loved working from home and then they were told, hey, even though you did your job great from home for the last year, we need you back in here because that's just the way it is. Like, but does that really matter, right? Like, how do we really embrace flexibility? I when I've had full-time employees in the past, many of which, well, actually, they've always been, for the most part, many times been older than me. I, was like, hey, well, I remember one time I had an employee who, it came to my attention that she had gone skiing that day and she was like trying to hide it from me. And I was like, well, first of all, how are the slopes? Right? Like, and she's like, oh, they were great. The powder was so good. And I was like, well, why are you hiding it? I was like, I've never asked you to clock in and clock out. Like, if the slopes are good, go. I don't even know all the slang for skiing, right? But there's a book called, I think by the guy who started Patagonia, he says, like, let my people surf, right? We have to think about, like, how do we help people to live their lives and get their jobs done? There's so much rigidity that's part of like the institutionalized professionalism that doesn't really matter, right? So how do we truly embrace flexibility and giving people the autonomy and the agency that they need to live their lives? So let me ask a question here. Based on some of these retention strategies, how can you, within your sphere of influence and within your sphere of control, how can you help colleagues who are considering leaving? And I've sort of listed them there. So you can use the Slido, unmute your mic to contribute. So how might you be able to help colleagues who are considering leaving?
I think that communication right now is everything. We have a lot of, and this has already been mentioned, but we have a lot of stories, a lot of rumors, because if you're not communicating the truth of the situation, people are just going to make it up. They're just going to come up with whatever they come up with, and that's what's going to happen. And then they'll think, okay, well, I got to get out of here. I got to get a job. I've got kids. My youngest is in college, whatever. And so I think if we are not communicating, and another big buzzword, if we are not transparent about everything that is happening, then I don't know that we can prevent people from leaving, because they're going to come to their own conclusions. And people have to, like you said, people have to take care of their own family and their own worlds and their own careers. You might have somebody in their early 30s that says, well, I can go to work across the river, make the same kind of money and not feel this intense paranoia or fear, because they're going to tell us stuff. Well, they may think that, it may not happen, but communication to me right now is everything. And that, I think, is one of the big things that we're missing.
Yeah, so on both sides of that, if you're in a position to manage communication, then we can do that. But we also have the ability to help limit the spread of noise that gets thrust into the vacuum, right? of like, I don't know if that's true, let's wait till we get some more information, or let's go get some more information, so that we can not be the one with the, what's the game with the, the cans and the strings and passing it around. And by the time it gets to the end, it's the wrong message. Okay, somebody's got jokes today. I dig it. Ask if there's a position for me wherever they're going. And even though you might be kidding, like, the fact is probably people are thinking this, right? Like, I think also reading here, I think we can remember to bring up the positive things in our conversations. Sometimes we get into a complaint spiral, but BPCC is still a great place to work. We need to talk about that too. So Alex has an honest comment in the chat of thinking like, I don't think I can help since I'm not in a position to provide them with the things they're searching for. Well, and again, I have no idea for whom you may be thinking of specifically, but we can all help facilitate belongingness, right? We can all try to help people feel valued. If people aren't feeling valued, what's something else that we can do to elevate them, to lift them up? The prompts that I've been putting on the CTL lately, I'm trying to do that, to give us opportunities to reflect on what's great about BPCC, how do we highlight our colleagues, how do we lift them up? So those are things that we can do. So somebody added here that we can certainly appreciate each other more frequently and out loud.
I think giving administration credit for what they are doing, because they are doing things. And, I often hear other faculty kind of roll their eyes like, yeah, that's just a free food truck or whatever. And I mean, I get that. It's just a food truck. It's not more money or whatever, but they're trying, they're making an effort. And I think a lot of times if we just as faculty have perspective and realize they are trying, they're not remaining in their silo all day, they are trying to reach out. We don't know what's going on the other side of the desk, just like they don't know what's going on for us sometimes. So we have to keep that perspective that it's not just about us in our little classrooms. As much as I would love that, it's not feasible for us to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know your systems that well, but I imagine working with Kirk through the Faculty Senate to bridge that gap, right? I mean, isn't that what the Senate's for? To bridge gaps between faculty and staff and leadership?
Yeah,
He's
it
nodding.
can tend towards the negative a little bit sometimes, to be honest.
Okay.
The Faculty Senate. And I just think if people just kind of took a breath and realized, okay, it's not perfect. There are problems, but look at what we are doing,
Sounds like Laura needs to be a leader in the Faculty Senate.
No, not at all. To be honest with you, I don't even go to the meetings anymore. I used to be staff, so I've seen both sides of the coin in a big way. And so I sort of see things differently, but with my great, whatever it's called, I'm noticing that even now I'm like, okay, this is getting a little crazy. But a lot of times I'm able to maintain a perspective because I've been on both sides of the campus, and some people haven't, and they just don't know what it's like to be on the other side.
Well, and I think that, what's come up between what you just said and some of the things that Kirk has said is that any way that we can help bridge any gaps and reduce the hierarchy between staff and faculty and administration, anything that we can do to help that is going to improve outcomes for everyone. So let's look at a final set of strategies from an article called How to Embrace Complex Change. And I put the link in the chat. I think that the QR code may be a mistake here. But again, it's How to Embrace Complex Change by Linda Brim. And so she has these 7 C's that she recommends. And so some of these, as you work through the change, through the 7 C's, are helping you to embrace complex change. And in many cases, that might mean you also leaving, but that's not what I'm advocating here, right? Like, I'm not saying leave, but how do we look at these different kinds of ways to think about moving through complex change as we are maybe the ones that are left behind? So the first thing that she offers is complexity. So we need to consider all the issues at play in any kind of change effort or what's happening, right? And so this might mean that, when we think about how our colleagues are leaving, what are the complexities of all of those reasons? And people rarely leave a job for a reason, right? Like, it's usually a stack full of reasons. Sometimes there's like a straw that broke the camel's back that's like, okay, I'm done, I'm out. But how can we understand the complexity of issues that people are facing? Next is clarity. So we want to understand what the issues are and then prioritize those things. And so especially as you all are navigating so much change between the administration and between people leaving, we need to, as Vicky said, thinking about communication is like getting the right answers. Really get clarity to what the problems are and begin to prioritize those. The next couple are really connected to some of the things that Laura's saying, right? Like, how do we be positive and see, what can be done? So Linda says confidence, believing that change can be done. If we can, change can be good. Change, we can survive it. And then creativity is brainstorming innovative solutions to problems that arise. And I will say, like, when we're using these creativity strategies, making sure the stakeholders are at the table. So we're not making those decisions without the people for whom they influence. And then the last couple of tips she offers are around commitment. So taking the first steps to implementing change, and this could mean surviving the change. So we have to commit to sticking with whatever it is that we need to adapt to. And then the last two are really sort of bridging that final piece of like, how to put all together. But I like the first few C's here because I think it helps us sort of have a little bit of perspective, like Laura offered. So the last question I have for you is to think about, how do you embrace and navigate change? Whether it's in your specific role at BPCC, whether you're thinking about how it affects you and your life overall, but how can you bring your skills of grit and resilience and navigating change to your role at BPCC? So you can share it or unmute your mic. Oh, Alex says, grit your teeth and hang on. It's terrible for your teeth and it gives you migraines, Alex. So let's not grit our teeth. How about breathe and hang on? I speak of that from experience. Too much grinding in my teeth. So I think the underlying truth of what you shared in the chat, Alex, is like, don't give up, right? Just persist and keep on keeping on. On the screen, we've got look for opportunities that might come out of change, look for those silver linings, take one day at a time. I definitely recommend practicing stoicism. I know it seems so silly, but like I've been reading the Daily Stoic every day this year. And they're just like little, one-page thoughts of just thinking about what can I control, what can I influence, and how do I let go of the rest? And when there's so much that's not in our control, it's a really great practice. And somebody added that here. I try to identify and prioritize what you have control over. If I have to try to think of everything at once, it feels overwhelming. Absolutely. All right. As we wrap up today, I want to invite you to evaluate today's session. I take your feedback and I share it with the BPCC team. So you can go to engineerinclusion.com/thanks. Let me give you that link. There is the link in the chat, so you can do a quick evaluation. And, stay tuned to the Center for Teaching and Learning so that you can always know what our next opportunities are. And so let's see if I can find the screen. So I encourage you to participate in the discussions that are there. Also, there are weekly articles with tools that you can use. And so please, hang out there and learn some things. And there are lots of workshops that are recorded. And I'll post a recording of this. Somebody asked if I could record that, so I'll post that and share with them. And with that, I just want to say thank you for coming today. I want to thank you for investing some time with us into building community. Allison or Kirk, any final words from you?
No, I thought it was a good discussion.
Yes, thank you, Megan. That was really good.
All right. Well, until next time, you all take care, and I'll see you on the Center for Teaching and Learning. Bye, y'all.